Pleasure to introduce Evelyn Glennie, who is our visitor this weekend and is going to give an extraordinary concert tomorrow. I've had the privilege of having a bit of a preview myself, and of course I urge you all to come to that tomorrow night at 7:30 in Concord Chapel. Tonight we are going to have really a conversation with Evelyn. I'm going to start it off. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we will open it up to questions from all of you. So, to begin with, I think my first question is, you have really broken the boundaries of what music making is, and I think by being a solo percussionist. And I'd like to know, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what the challenges were for you of becoming a solo percussionist in a world which really didn't have any solo percussionists as much before.
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you very much for coming this evening. It's a great privilege for me to be in this very beautiful part of the world, even in the dead of winter. But nevertheless, it's certainly very cosy in here. It's an interesting question because really, first of all, I was brought up in the northeast part of Scotland. And it was quite a remote farming community that every child who walked through the doors of our secondary school, which is almost the equivalent of the high school here, but starting from the age of 12, we all had the opportunity to learn a musical instrument. And so this whole musical environment was so natural for us to be in. We had orchestras, we had bands, we had recording groups, choirs, jazz groups, pop groups, you name it. And so there was no real categorization as such. Music making was about sound creating. And first and foremost, as a musician, you have to create sound. In order to do that, you have to have some sort of understanding of what sound is about. And in order to create that, you need your tools of the trade. In my case, percussion. In someone else's case, it could be the voice or trumpet or clarinet or something. So really, I then assumed that once the decision had been made to become a professional musician, I had assumed the world was full of solo percussion players. It was so natural for myself and my colleagues within school and in the community to play solos and to be part of percussion ensembles and so on. And it was quite a shock to the system when I became a full-time music student in London at the Royal Academy of Music from the age of 16 to 19, that in fact, where were all the solo percussionists? They simply did not exist on a full-time basis. And so the real challenge was indeed, where's the repertoire? And I had a little look in the library at the Academy and discovered two percussion concerti, one by the French composer Darius Milhaud and the other by the American composer Robert Kurka. And of course, I immediately tried to learn these pieces as best as I possibly could, but of course the Academy didn't have all of the equipment in order to perform those pieces. The Kurka, for example, required a 5-octave marimba, and the Academy had a 4-octave. So immediately the imagination had to come into play, and for this piece to be adapted to a 4-octave instrument. But, you know, as a 16-year-old, I was determined to make anything happen. So what I then did, I realized that I had to very quickly learn the art of creating your own opportunities. And so I bought the British Music Yearbook, and this is the equivalent of Musical America, I think, over here. And this is a book that lists festivals, orchestras, venues, managers, agents, composers, instrumentalists, you name it. And of course I opened to the composer section. And there it perhaps lists maybe 300-400 composers. And I wrote to about 200 of them. And I asked, would you care to write a piece for solo percussion? What I hadn't realized was that they needed to be paid. Some very interesting replies, all of them I have kept. Of course, this was before the days of email, and fax machines were just coming into play. So these were all handwritten letters, very often with handwritten replies. And so many of the composers took great pity on this young, up-and-coming performer And they said, well, you know, I'd be happy to write a 2, 3, 4, 5 minute piece of music. So I ended up with this body of repertoire, very short pieces that I was actually able to use as encore material for concerto work or recital work that I was doing, or certain pieces that I could begin concerts with. So they actually became really little gems, and I was holding on to these things because they were written for me. But it was an opportunity for me to begin working with composers. Whilst I was at the Academy, my first year there, every new student had the opportunity to play a concerto. And so, of course, I put myself forward for that. And, but I was declined on the basis that it would be more beneficial for an orchestra and for a young violinist or pianist to have that chance, because no one would ever perform a percussion concerto. So to hire the parts and, you know, to spend time with the orchestra learning a piece that they probably would never perform again really was not going to happen. I was obviously not happy. So I then thought, how can I get around this? So I basically commissioned my first percussion concerto by asking a student composer to write something. And his name is Kenneth Dempster, a fellow Scot. And of course this was his first opportunity to write a percussion concerto. And lo and behold, we had this opportunity to actually play this piece of music. I invited the principal to come along, and in the over 100-year history of the Academy, this was the first ever percussion concerto to ever be performed. So it was a little historical moment as well, and a great opportunity for me to work on a much lengthier piece of music. And so once I graduated, I then obviously had to work very seriously in finding composers, in trying to support the commission financially, and it's been a huge part of my work really for the past 20 years.
Thank you. Could you just, as a percussionist, one of the great things about being a percussionist is that there is really no end of instruments that you could play. Are you still looking for new instruments, or could you tell us a little bit about how you have discovered new instruments yourself to play?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is just an interest that I think naturally comes from percussion players. We're always on the lookout. We look at something and we look at the texture, we look at the material of something, we look at the size of it, we want to touch it, we want to feel this, and of course we know that the sense of touch is really what generates the sound first and foremost. So even if you're a brass player, a wind player, a string player, a pianist, a percussionist, a vocalist, it's all coming from this understanding of touch. Something has to touch another surface in order for something to be produced. And so really percussionists are naturally looking all around them all the time, because anything you strike, anything you scrape, you know, anything even that you can bow, anything you come in contact with, in our minds is a percussion instrument. And I think percussionists are naturally open to the idea of being sound creators rather than thinking of themselves as percussionists. You know, as soon as you think like that, then you're focused on becoming a percussionist. Whereas, you know, my whole profession is about sound, and my whole profession is to take this sound into and make it into some sort of emotional content for you, the audience. You know, so I have to get out of the kind of boundary of the word percussion and really try to communicate through sound. And so this then opens up my mind and my imagination, and almost, you know, there's a childlike curiosity there to really keep all the senses open and you know, just see the tabletop or the chair as something that is capable of producing sound. So obviously having the opportunity to travel allows you to come in contact with wonderful people, wonderful musicians, and wonderful instrument makers as well. People who have lots of different approaches. And a lot of the great percussion players are in fact people who don't have music agents, who are not part of you know, category orchestras, or who have PR companies behind them or big record contracts behind them. They could be people playing on the street. And the level of playing is absolutely unbelievable. So percussionists usually have their feet firmly on the ground, because there are always people who specialize in certain areas of percussion playing. It could be